Hey guys, tonight we're drifting into the chill of ancient skies, where the northern lights flicker like forgotten fireflies over vast, whispering tundras, and the crunch of snow under fur-clad feet echoes like a half-remembered dream. Imagine huddling by a seal oil lamp, the air thick with the smoky tang of blubber, as stars prick the endless black dome above each one, a silent promise of lands yet unseen. But here is the cheeky truth. If you tried this journey today without a parka and GPS, you'd probably last about as long as a snow cone in a sauna. Yeah, these folks were built different, navigating frozen hellscapes with nothing but memory and grit. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment with your location and local time. Are you tuning in from a cozy bed in Tokyo at 3 a.m. or a hammock in Miami pretending it's winter? Let's make this a global lullaby. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. In the dim, perpetual twilight of Siberia's northeastern reaches, around 3000 BC, the ancestors of the Inuit stirred like shadows lengthening across the frost-kissed earth. These were the Thule people, or at least, that's what modern tongues call them, though their own words for themselves hummed softer, like wind through reindeer moss. Picture family clusters, bundled in caribou hides that smelled of earth and salt, gathered around low fires that spat embers into the indigo haze. The sun, that lazy tease, barely skimmed the horizon for months on end, painting the sky in bruised purples and reluctant golds. It was a world where daylight felt like a polite visitor, dropping by just long enough to remind you of warmth before vanishing again. And under that vast, unblinking canopy, they began to learn the stars not as distant sparkles, but as living maps, etched deep into the folds of their minds like tattoos on a sailor's arm. These Siberian kin weren't nomads by whim. Survival demanded it. The land was a grudging host, doling out meager gifts of willow roots and ptarmigan eggs amid herds of woolly mammoths that had long since lumbered into legend. Families' elders with faces like weathered ivory, mothers cradling babes swaddled in softened seal, gut huddled in semi-subterranean homes, pits dug into permafrost and roofed with whalebone and sod. The air inside carried the faint, comforting rot of dried fish hung from rafters, mingling with the sharp bite of urine-soaked moss used as diapers. Yeah, talk about eco-friendly reusables. Those moss pads were the original biodegradable wonder, soaked and swapped like a nightly ritual that make any modern parent nod in weary solidarity. Historians peg this era as the birthing ground of Arctic mastery, a mainstream fact etched in carbon-dated bones and harpoon points unearthed from thawing bogs. Around 3000 BC, these proto-Inuit honed skills that would carry them across oceans of ice, their tools evolving from simple bone awls to intricate toggling harpoons, devices that flipped open inside a seal's flesh like a cruel pop-up book. But oh, the quirky underbelly. Some elders, in hushed tales passed down like contraband recipes, spoke of star spirits that could be bartered with using offerings of polished amber. Fringe whispers suggest they strung these gems on sinew necklaces, dangling them toward Cassiopeia to coax fair winds, less astronomy, more celestial yard sail. Who knows if it worked? But in a world where blizzards could erase a trail overnight, a little cosmic haggling probably felt like a steal. As twilight bled into starlit vigils, the teaching began. Grandparents, their voices gravelly from years of chanting against gales, would point skyward with gnarled fingers, tracing invisible lines between Polaris, the North Star, that steadfast anchor, and the Big Dipper's crooked plow. "See there," they'd murmur, the words curling like smoke. The drinking gourd tips its paw toward the great white bridge, Children, wide-eyed and grease-smeared from feasts of raw caribou liver rich in vitamin C. Nature's own anti-scurvy hack. Take that. Citrus smugglers committed these patterns to rote, no parchment or apps. Just repetition, under the aurora's green veil, where the sky danced like it had one too many at the cosmic hoedown. One little joke from the fire circle. Why did the star refuse to play hide and seek? Because even in Siberia, it always stayed put, unlike Uncle Kivak, who once got lost chasing a rabbit shadow. Yet, not all lessons were solemn. Laughter punctured the hush, light as falling snow. Imagine a young hunter, puffed up with bravado, mimicking the dipper's arc with a stick, only to trip over his own snowshoes, prompting a chorus of chuckles that warmed better than any flame. "Boy," his father would tease gently, "the stars don't stumble. Why should you?" These moments wove the celestial lore tighter, turning astronomy into ancestry. Families didn't just memorize. They embodied the sky. Their migrations dictated by the wheeling constellations that marked seasons like chapters in an unending saga. Deeper into the twilight realms, debates simmer among scholars like polite arguments at a very chilly dinner party. Historians still argue whether these Siberian roots stemmed from a single, bold exodus or a slow seep of clans over centuries, trickling like meltwater from the Chukchi Peninsula. Some point to genetic threads linking modern Inuit to Siberian Yupik peoples, a DNA tapestry unbroken by time's shears. Others counter with tool discrepancies, those Siberian harpoons with their barbed elegance versus cruder Asian variants suggesting multiple waves, each refining the craft like a game of ancestral telephone. Life pulsed in rhythmic defiance against the freeze. Summers, brief as a sigh, burst with frenzy. Women scraping hides with ulus curved blades that sang against flesh, while men ventured onto the Chukchi Sea in umiaks, those broad-beamed skin boats lashed from driftwood and walrus hide. The vessels bobbed like obedient beasts, their frames greased with blubber to slip the waves' grasp. Sensory overload in the mild months. The briny slap of spray on cheeks. The guttural calls of kittiwakes wheeling overhead. The earthy musk of blooming saxifrage carpeting the thaw. But winter? Ah, that's when the stars truly claimed their throne. Winds howled like scorned lovers, piling snow into drifts that buried entrances, forcing the clan inward. There, by the Quulik lamps, golden pool, stories unfurled, epics of raven tricksters who stole the sun, or bear spirits that gifted the first kayak. A second jest slipped in. What do you call an Inuit stargazer with cold feet? A constellation quitaha. But try telling that to the frostbite. These narratives weren't fluff. They were the glue. Celestial maps weren't abstract. They were survival sonnets. Polaris, the nail in the sky, held steady as clans pondered the pull westward. Whispers of greener hunts across the frozen strait, growing like moss on stone. Quirky rituals marked the stargazing. Some clans brewed a tea from willow bark and crowberry, sipped in circles to sharpen the inner eye, claiming it turned night skies into living ledgers. Fringe or not, it beat staring at a blank void. Right? And in those circles, bonds forged, marriages sealed under the Pleiades, disputes settled by the moon's wax and wane. As the Big Dipper dipped low one fateful twilight, signaling the great migration's itch, families felt the stir. Tools were oiled, songs rehearsed, dreams laced with visions of ice bridges spanning impossible seas. Elders, sensing the shift like wolves scenting caribou, gathered the young. The stars call. They'd intone, voices blending with the wind's low moan. We answer, or we wither. No fanfare, just quiet resolve, the kind that turns whispers into waves. And so, from Siberia's starlit cradle, the journey's first threads began to pull taut, drawing these resilient souls toward horizons blurred by blizzard's breath. The air grew thicker with purpose, the perpetual gloam a canvas for their unfolding fate. Children, now half-apprenticed navigators, traced Polaris in the frost, with mittened fingers, giggling when patterns melted away a third, light-hearted poke. See? Even the ice forgets if you're not paying attention. Lucky for us, the real stars don't melt that easy. Families packed umiaks with dried sinew and bone flints, the creak of lashings a lullaby of departure. The land, that stern matriarch, released them grudgingly. Tundra grasses bowing as if in salute. Under endless twilight skies, where the Milky Way spilled like spilled milk across the vault, they etched their maps deeper, not on stone, but in synapse and saga. Polaris gleamed, unyielding, a beacon mocking the chaos below, and in that gleam, the promise of Bering's threshold flickered, faint as a held breath. That held breath, caught in the throat of the Siberian wind, soon exhaled into action, as clans turned their gaze from skyward musings to the gritty work of hands collused by cold and craft. No grand forges here, no bellows belching smoke like in some Viking yarn, just quiet determination under the perpetual gloam, where the Chukchi Sea lapped at gravel shores like a restless dog. Families, those tight-knit knots of fur and sinew, gathered on beaches strewn with driftwood ribs, the air sharp with the tang of tidal pools, and the faint, metallic whiff of exposed iron in the stones. Elders barked soft commands, their voices threading through the lap of waves, while the young, those wide-eyed apprentices from the starlit circles, hauled frames of lashed willow and whalebone, bending them into the graceful curves of umiaks and kayaks. It was preparation season, that frantic interlude before the ice locked everything in place, when the sea was still a fickle ally, not yet the frozen foe. Imagine the rhythm of it. The rhythmic thwack of stone adzes chipping bone into harpoon heads, each strike echoing like a heartbeat against the hush. Women, sleeves rolled to elbows, glistening with sweat despite the chill, stretched walrus hides taut over frames, their fingers nimble as they stitched seams with sinew thread dipped in blubber to make it pliable, then twisted tight as a lover's promise. The hides, cured in smoky lodges until they gleamed like oiled leather, were the boat's skin, flexible yet unyielding, designed to flex with the sea's tantrums without splitting. Men tested the give, pressing palms into the taut surface, listening for the faint creak that meant ready, or the ominous pop that spelled do-over. And oh, the scent, that heady mix of fresh scraped hide, salty brine, and the earthy smoke from nearby cookfires where seal blubber rendered down into pearly oil. It clung to everything, a perfume of perseverance that make your modern nose wrinkle. But to them, it was the aroma of home on the move. Mainstream history nods to this era's ingenuity with solid evidence. Archaeological digs along the Siberian coast have unearthed umiak frames dating back to 2500 BC, their driftwood bones carbon dated to prove these weren't flimsy rafts but engineering marvels, broad enough for a dozen souls and provisions, paddled across swells that could swamp lesser craft. These boats weren't just transport. They were lifelines, hauling families, dogs, and sleds in umiaks' bellies while sleek kayaks, personal hunters, steeds darted alongside like eager pups. But here is a quirky fringe tidbit that tickles the edges of lore. Some clans, according to whispered oral histories, invoked boat spirits by burying a tiny ivory carving a miniature kayak etched with star patterns beneath the keel during assembly. Supposedly, it kept the vessel from tipping in rogue waves, a bit like tucking a lucky charm in your glove box. Except this one's got a side of shamanic flair. Worked or not, it probably beat seasickness prayers to the porcelain god. As frames took shape, the harpoons came next, those elegant killers forged from the same bone and antler stockpiles. Picture a young smith, let's call him Atka for the sake of a sleepy yarn, squatting by a slab of slate, his breath fogging the air as he naps flint into razor barbs. The heads were detachable marvels. Ivory foreshafts, slotted with stone blades that toggled open on impact, ensuring no seal slipped the hook. Line coiled from braided sealskin, tough as rebar and twice as flexible, spooled onto bone drums that fit snug in the palm. Testing meant mock hunts on the beach hurling at driftwood prey, while the clan whooped encouragement, the thuds and splashes punctuating the grey afternoon. Sensory immersion, the gritty slide of stone under thumb, the slick pop of sinew snapping into place, the faint, warm puff of breath on frozen fingers to thaw them mid-knot. Modern aside, these DIY sessions make your weekend IKEA assembly look like a spa day. No instructions, just trial, error, and the occasional splinter that have you cursing in Inuktitut. Laughter, that great unfreezer, bubbled up amid the toil. One evening, as a half-built kayak keeled over in the shallows, dumping its builder face first into icy foam, the clan erupted in guffaws that rolled like thunder across the bay. "Ah, Nuka," the elder chuckled, hauling him up by the collar. "You've invented the first diving kayak. Next time, remember the spirit carving, or at least plug the leaks." Another jest, lighter than the snowflakes starting to dust the hides. Why do Inuit boats never get lost? Because they're always on the right current, unlike cousin Ilula Sat, who once paddled in circles chasing his own shadow. These quips weren't just morale boosters. They were memory hooks, tying the craft's lessons to chuckles that echo in dreams. Deeper in, scholars huddle over campfires of debate. Historians still argue whether the umiak's design borrowed from earlier Asian rivercraft or sprang fully formed from Arctic necessity, like Athena from Zeus' headache. Genetic and linguistic ties suggest Siberian roots, but tool variations, those Siberian harpoons with their elegant barbs, versus blunter Asian kin, fuel the fire. Was it evolution or exchange? The jury's out, sipping virtual tea in ivory towers far from the frost. The work wove families tighter than those sinew seams. Mothers taught daughters the art of hide stretching, fingers guiding fingers in a dance older than the stars they'd soon follow. Fathers sparred with sons over harpoon balance, the whoosh of throws cutting the air like whispered secrets. Even the dogs, those shaggy huskies with eyes like polished amber, got in on it, gnawing discarded bones into chew toys that doubled as impromptu drags for practice runs. Summers peaked in a frenzy of final fittings. Boats dragged to water's edge, loaded with tent poles of lashed ivory and caches of pemmican that pounded mix of meat, fat, and berry, sticky as regret and twice as sustaining. The sea, sensing the intent, grew moody, whipping foam into frothy warnings. But the clans pressed on, oiling hulls with blubber until they shone like wet seals. One twilight, as the Big Dipper began its familiar tilt, remember that, drinking gourd from the fire circles, the first umiaks slipped their moorings. Paddles dipped in unison, blades slicing the slate-grey waves with a hush that swallowed all but the creak of frames, and the low chant of departure songs. Kayaks flanked them, sleek shadows skimming the swells, harpoons at the ready for any errant walrus that dared interrupt. The air hummed with salt and anticipation, the horizon a smudged promise where sea met the pale ghost of ice. Sensory fade, the chill spray beading on lashes, the rhythmic slap against hide, the faint, acrid bite of fear sweat under armpits. But resolve held, bone deep as the tools in their grips. Not every launch was poetry. Storms snuck in like uninvited guests, one gale scattering a clan's gear across the shallows, prompting a soggy retrieval that ended in soaked hilarity around a beach fire. "Well," the drenched leader quipped, wringing out his parka, "at least the sea blessed our boats early." Third joke's on her. Next time, well, charge admission for the swim. These hiccups honed them sharper, turning mishaps into mastery. As boats multiplied along the coast, clusters of umiaks bobbing like a flotilla of determined ducks, the migration's machinery clicked into place. Harpoons, now battle-tested in mock hunts that left beaches littered with splintered prey, hung ready in kayaks' holds. Families, faces etched with the same quiet fire as Polaris itself, scanned the strait ahead, that narrow throat of water flanked by ice jaws. The crafting complete, the clans lingered on those beaches a moment longer, etching final prayers into the sand with stick tips patterns of dipper and nail. A terrestrial echo of the sky maps above. Winds whispered encouragements, carrying the faint, far-off crack of forming pack ice, like knuckles popping before a brawl. And in that crackle, the pull strengthened, drawing them from Siberia's embrace toward the unforgiving threshold, where stars would prove their truest allies. The sea, for now, cradled them gently, but all knew the freeze waited, patient as a predator in the gloom. The pull of that smudged horizon sharpened as the umiaks cut deeper into the Chukchi's moody embrace, their hides whispering against the swell like secrets too heavy for the wind. Clans, now a loose armada of shadows on the slate-grey sea, bobbed in uneasy rhythm, kayaks darting like vigilant scouts, while the Big Dipper hung low, its handle a crooked finger beckoning westward. Polaris, that unyielding nail hammered into the sky's brow, gleamed through the gathering dusk, a fixed point amid the chaos, mocking the waves' wild dance. Families huddled low in the boats' bellies, breath mingling in visible puffs, the air thick with the brine of spray, and the faint, greasy comfort of packed blubber. Elders scanned the treacly horizon, murmuring star chants under their breath, while children, tucked against mothers' sides, traced invisible lines on fogged hides with chubby fingers. It was the threshold now. Bering Strait, that narrow, treacherous gut between worlds. 50 miles of water that could freeze solid overnight, turning ally to assassin in a heartbeat. Launch days blurred into a haze of salt-stung eyes and paddles that bit deep, each stroke a vow against the current's pull. The sea, sensing intruders, grew petulant. Swells reared like startled horses, cresting white and slamming down with a roar that drowned out all but the creak of frames and the sharp inhale of fear. Sensory assault in the mild hours, the slap of foam on cheeks like icy kisses, the metallic tang of wet iron from the boat's bone ribs, the low thrum of chants vibrating through sodden parkas. Modern aside, if this were your Uber ride across town, you'd be slamming the app for a 5-star review on the scenic route. But these folks? They paddled on, harpoons lashed at hand, eyes flicking from wave to star like multitasking pros in a storm. As the strait narrowed, ice began its sly encroachment, floe after floe drifting in like uninvited party crashers, grinding against hulls with a groan that set teeth on edge. Clans navigated by ear as much as eye, listening for the telltale crackle of pressure ridges forming, those jagged seams where plates of white collided like tectonic tantrums. Polaris guided true, its altitude marking latitude with eerie precision, no compass needed when the sky's your dashboard. One clan, let's spin a yarn about Old Keeler for flavor, led the van, a wiry navigator with a scar like a crescent moon across his brow. Who'd memorized the dipper's paw since he could chew blubber? Follow the nail. Head rasp over the gale, voice cutting through like a warmed knife, and shell thread you through the white jaws. His umiak, bloated with tents and toddlers, plowed ahead, dogs whining softly in the hold, their fur matted with spray. Mainstream history carves this crossing in stone. Around 3000 BC, these migrations punched through Bering's barrier in waves, with radiocarbon-dated sites on both shores, harpoon fragments and camp middens, proving the strait wasn't a wall, but a watery turnstile for human ambition. These weren't suicidal leaps. Clans timed runs for late summer thaws, when pack ice thinned to a treacherous skim, allowing boats to weave through leads like threading a needle in a blizzard. But the quirky fringe, oral tales from Yupik elders, whisper of ice whispers, ethereal voices carried on the wind, luring the unwary to thin spots where floes carved without warning. Some say it was the strait itself, a living entity bartering passage for songs. Others chalk it to wind howling through cracks. But in the dead of night, adrift in fog, who'd argue with a frozen phantom choir? Blizzards hit like cosmic sneezes, unannounced and unrelenting, swallowing horizons in a whiteout blur where water and ice merged into one endless, undifferentiated void. Visibility dropped to arm's length, the world reduced to the slap of paddle, the heave of hull, and the frantic pulse under your ribs. Families lashed themselves to thwarts with sinew ropes, lest a rogue swell pitch them overboard into the numbing drink eternity's chill bath, where survival odds dipped lower than a dipper's dip. Elders kept the chants alive, voices hoarse but harmonious, invoking the stars even as clouds veiled them. Polaris, pierce the veil. Dipper, dip us safe. Children, bless their muffled whimpers, clutched ivory talismans, miniature boats carved from walrus tusk, warm from pocket heat as if grip alone could anchor fate. Sensory dive, the wet wool slap of mittens on wood, the acrid sting of frost-nipped noses, the muffled crunch of ice, nibbling at the keel like a persistent beaver. Laughter, in the lulls, it surfaced like breaching whales, tentative at first, then full-throated to chase the gloom. Picture a young paddler, mid-blizzard, mistaking his own shadow for a walrus fluke, and lunging with a mock harpoon only to spear his uncle's parka flap. The clan dissolved into chortles that shook the boat, warm as a hearth in the heart of the howl. Easy there. Tupik, the uncle spluttered, batting away the tine. Save the heroics for real blubber, or at least aim for the right side of the family. Second jest, softer, as snow eased. Why did the blizzard refuse to share its secrets? It was too busy flaking out, much like Aunt Nuna's famous flatbread. These ripples of mirth weren't denial. They were defiance, tiny fires against the freeze, echoing the fire circle quips from Siberian beaches. Scholars, bundled in their metaphorical anoraks, still tussle over the strait's toll. Historians still argue whether these crossings claimed half the migrants to drowning and drift, or if savvy star law kept losses lean. Like a well-trimmed sail, genetic models suggest bottlenecks, populations dipping low enough to leave scars in modern DNA, but artifact scatters imply resilience. Clans rebounding like seals after a storm. Was it grit or grace? The debate simmers, as endless as the ice itself. Deeper into the strait, the white grew thicker, floes clumping into a puzzle of peril, where one wrong nudge meant crunch and capsize. Chilas clan pressed on, umiaks poling through slush-choked channels, kayaks slipping ahead to test the way harpoons ready not just for hunt but for makeshift prods against bergs. The air turned to diamond dust, each breath a sparkle in the lungs, while winds keened a dirge that plucked at heartstrings. Families shared body heat in huddled masses, passing blubber chunks hand to mitt like communal comforters. The fatty melt, a slick reminder of feasts far behind. One night, or was it day, time smeared in the endless half-light, a lead opened like a reluctant mouth, wide enough for passage, its edges glowing faint under Polaris gaze. There, Keela breathed, pointing where the star's ray kissed the water. The nails thread, paddles bit renewed, the chant swelling to a hum that hummed back from the ice, as if the strait approved. Not all were so lucky. Tales linger of stragglers caught in sudden shears, boats ground to flotsam as floes embraced like jealous lovers. Survivors, washed to ice pans, Huddled in snow caves, scooped with bare hands, ivory tools too precious to risk waiting for rescue or the Thor's mercy. Sensory echo. The muffled thud of heart against ribs in the dark. The faint drip of melt from overhead. The far-off bark of a clansman's call. But rescue came, more often than not, guided by that same stellar stitchwork. Dipper's paw tracing lost kin like a cosmic bloodhound. Third joke, whispered in a cave's hush to rally flagging spirits. What do you call a lost kayak in a blizzard? A cool mystery, but don't worry, Polaris always points the way home. Unlike my sense of direction after one too many willow teas, as the armada thinned, some turning back to Siberia's familiar bite, others claimed by the deep, the core pushed through, boats scarred but seaworthy, hides patched with optimism. The strait spat them out grudgingly, winds easing to a sigh as the far shore loomed. A jagged silhouette of volcanic cliffs dusted white, Alaska's frozen welcome mat. Polaris dipped lower, affirming the latitude shift, while the Dipper wheeled on, ever the faithful plow. Families, numb-lipped and wide-eyed, beached their craft on gravel spits, the grind of keels on stone a symphony of survival, fires kindled quick from driftwood and optimism, the smoke curling skyward like thanks. Blubber sizzled, releasing that golden, homey scent that cut the brine, and songs rose, victory verses laced with loss, stars woven into every line. The threshold crossed, but the journey's marrow only quickened. Clans, ribs showing through stretched hides, scanned the new coast. Endless white plains rolling to horizons, haunted by mirage mountains. Harpoons, those faithful forges from Siberian sands, hung ready for hunts unborn. And overhead, the stars Polaris steady. Dipper, tipping its endless paw, whispered of treks yet to come. Tundra calling like an old friend with a harsh embrace. The blizzard's blur faded to memory, but the lesson lingered. One misstep in the white, and eternity claimed you soft as snow. Yet here they were, etched in ice and saga, the first threads of a new world's weave. Those victory fires on the gravel spits crackled with a defiance that chased the strait's chill from bones, their smoke tendrils twisting upward like fingers waving farewell to the old world. Clans, those battered flotillas of fur and fortitude, spilled onto Alaska's rugged flank, a coastline carved by glaciers into fjords that gaped like astonished mouths, fringed with cliffs that loomed black against the perpetual pearl of the sky. First footfalls crunched tentative on the shingle, boots of stitched sealskin grinding salt and stone. The air a crisp slap of pine resin undercut by the briny rot of kelp windrows. Polaris hovered lower now, a conspiratorial wink at this new latitude, while the Big Dipper traced its eternal arc, pouring out an invisible bounty over the land's reluctant welcome. Families, faces etched with the strait's gaunt souvenirs, sunken cheeks and eyes like polished agate stumbled ashore. Umiaks beached high against the tide's retreat. Kayaks nested like exhausted birds. It was claim time. That raw, wordless staking of turf, where every step whispered hours into the wind's indifferent howl. The shore unfolded in a sensory sprawl, waves hissing retreat over barnacle-crusted rocks. The faint, sulphurous puff of geothermal vents hidden in the scree, the distant thunder of carving ice from shadowed bays where bergs birthed with a groan that vibrated ribs. Elders, those scarred captains of the crossing, planted harpoons tipped down in the gravel, impromptu totems marking the boundary, their barbs glinting like defiant teeth. "Here we root," Keeler murmured, his voice a gravel rasp blending with the surf, as if the land itself might listen. Children, freed from the boat's cramped holds, scampered like seal pups, their laughter pebbling the air high and brittle against the vast hush, while mothers kindled fires from driftwood ribs, the snap and pop releasing a smoky incense that curled lazy into the gloam. Modern aside, Landing here without a latte stand or Airbnb? You'd be Googling nearest volcano for heat. But these folks, they turned pebbles into pantries, scanning the littoral for clamshells winking like buried coins. Hunting grounds beckoned first. Those shadowed realms beneath towering ice walls that reared like frozen sentinels. Their blue-veined faces dripping melt in lazy rivulets that fed streams teeming with salmon shadows. Men fanned out in loose phalanxes, harpoons slung over shoulders, eyes sharp for caribou tracks in the mossy verge or walrus hauls on offshore pans. The first killer bull seal, fat as a featherbed, lunging from a tide pool with a bellow that shook the mist, came quick. Its thrash a ballet of sinew and spray. Harpoon flew true, toggling home with a wet thunk. Line singing taut as the clan hauled it beachward. The drag carving furrows in the wet sand. Blood steamed on the stones. A coppery tang that drew gulls in shrieking spirals, while the women gutted swift blades flashing in the half-light. Innards steaming into the chill like offerings to the frost gods. Feasts followed. Raw liver passed hand to hand, its iron warmth flooding veins like liquid sun, chased with handfuls of crowberries tart as regret. Mainstream history anchors this arrival solid. By 2500 BC, Thule precursors dotted Alaska's coasts with campsites. Their middens piled shells and bone scatters dated to prove these shores weren't virgin but ripe for reaping. Overlapping with fading Paleo-Arctic folk in a handover of Ice Age hand-me-downs. These sites, from the Aleutians to the Brooks Range, brim with toggling harpoons identical to Siberian kin. A breadcrumb trail of migration, etched in refuse. But the quirky fringe, some oral sagas, passed like contraband in igloo hush, speak of shore guardians, ethereal otters with human eyes that tested newcomers by hiding prey in plain sight, only revealing it to those who sang the right star lullaby. Fact or fancy, in a land where mirages danced on ice, a little anthropomorphic wildlife probably spiced up the monotony better than Netflix, as days blurred into the endless summer smear sun circling like a tipsy lantern. Shadows stretching long and lazy clans pushed inland, footfalls softening from crunch to squelch on tundra carpets of lichen and Labrador tea. Towering ice loomed eternal, seracs teetering like drunken monoliths, their crevasses yawning black as forgotten debts. Navigation here swapped sea swell for subtle cues, wind-polished erratics marking safe paths, the faint, yeasty scent of willow thickets signaling fresh water. Families trekked in strung-out lines, dogs straining at traces, sleds laden with hides and hope, though wheels were whimsy here. Runners of bone scraping the permafrost's grudging give. Sensory immersion, the spongy give underfoot, like walking on soaked quilts. The buzz of Arctic bees drunk on heather nectar, the far-off rumble of avalanches, a bass note underscoring every step. One misstep, a boot slip into a hidden crevasse. The crack like bones snapping, and eternity's maw gaped, swallowing screams into silence. Yet they pressed Polaris their pole star, dipper dipping wisdom like an old well. Laughter threaded the treks, light as ptarmigan down. Envision a hunter, bow drawn on a hare's blur, only to loose at a rock mistaken for fluff arrow, thunking harmless into gravel as the prey revealed itself a boulder. The clan's chuckles rolled soft across the plain, warming frost-kissed cheeks. "Ah, kale," his sister teased, retrieving the shaft with a grin. "You've felled the mighty pebble. Next time, aim for the stars. Remember that drinking gourd? It never runs." Second jest, murmured around a midday halt, where blubber chunks sizzled on hot stones. Why don't Alaskan hares play tag? They're always one leap ahead, unlike Brother Inuit, who tags his own shadow on windy days. These quips, gentle as the breeze off the ice, knit the weary tighter, turning peril into parable. Deeper in the scholarly chill, debates frost the air. Historians still argue whether these first footfalls displaced earlier inhabitants in a clash of cultures or blended peacefully. Like inks in water, genetic traces murky, artifacts overlapping like polite neighbors. Some see conquest in the tool shifts, harpoons evolving sharper. Others symbiosis, with shared sodhouse designs. The ice holds the secrets, melting slow as grudges, claims deepened with each foray. Hunting grounds mapped not on skin but in mind. Boundaries etched by cairns of skull and antler wolf jaws grinning at intruders. Caribou horns thrusting skyward like accusations. Women foraged the verges, Ulus flashing to unearth roots bulbous as hope. Their bundles slung in moss-lined baskets that swayed like pendulums. Evenings drew them to sheltered coves, where ice shadows stretched long. Fires kindled in rings of blackened stone, remnants of those paleo ghosts, adopted like found family. Songs rose then, starlit reprises from the strait, voices weaving Polaris into verses of belonging. Nail holds the new weave, dipper pours the plenty. Children, bellies full of seal stew, that thick, gamey broth laced with seaweeds, slip-traced constellations in the embers, giggling when sparks mimicked shooting stars, sensory close. The pop of fat in the flames, the woolly hush of parkas rustling close, the faint mineral tang of meltwater sipped from horn cups. Not every claim was bloodless. Skirmishes flickered with rival bands, shadowy figures on the ice rim, harpoons glinting challenge ending in wary truces sealed over shared kills, the meat divvied under truce stars. One clan, Kilason, bartered a kayak frame for passage rights, the exchange lit by Aurora's green sigh. A celestial broker. Quirky ritual marked the pacts, a fringe tale of ice oaths, where parties licked salt from the same flow, binding tongues to truth's slippery symbolism. But in a world of white lies, who'd quibble, and in the lulls, mirth bubbled, a toddler, aping the adult's solemn lick, only to stick fast to the flow, prompting peals of laughter as uncles pried her free with warm breaths. Third joke, soft as the fires die. What do you call a frozen treaty? A cool alliance but melt too quick. And it's back to harpoon tag. As weeks waned into the sun's reluctant dip days shortening like pulled threads, the clans rooted deeper. Sod huts rising in hollows scooped from the turf, their domes humped like sleeping beasts against the wind's first nips. Hunting grounds fanned wide. Caribou trails staked by blazes on birches. Walrus rookeries patrolled from kayaks that skimmed the pack like knives through butter. Ice towers watched indifferent, their shadows pooling cold at dawn. But the land yielded grudgingly, herds thundering in autumn runs, their musk heavy on the breeze. Families, now laced with the shore's cadence, scanned horizons not with straits dread but a hunter's hunger. Harpoons honed by new kills, stars their steadfast scribes. The whispers of the coast grew bolder, etched in every footprint, every fire scar. Polaris gleamed approval, lower and brighter, while the dipper wheeled on, tipping its paw over plains that promised more. Blizzards loomed on the fringe, horizons hazing white. But for now, the footfalls echoed victory soft, sure, a lullaby of landing in lands shadowed tall by ice's ancient spires. And in those shadows, the tundra's call quickened, pulling them onward, one crunch at a time. From those shadowed coves where ice towers pooled their chill like unspoken regrets, the clans felt the tundra's tug of vast, undulating plain that stretched like an unrolled hide to horizons smudged with perpetual haze. No more the sea's slap and sway. Now it was foot to frozen earth. The crunch of snow crust under mucklucks a metronome to the migration's next verse. Chilas folk, bellies lined with the shore's first, Grudging gifts seal fat rendered to golden pools. Caribou jerky chewy, as old grudges strung out in patient lines. Dogs at the fore with noses to the wind, their yips faint punctuation in the wind's low moan. Polaris rode higher in this inland vault, a steady pulse above the wheeling dipper, stars turning slow like millstones grinding time into trek. Families shouldered packs of lashed ivory and sinew-bound tents, harpoons slung like faithful staves. The air a crisp bite, laced with the mineral tang of exposed earth, where permafrost heaved in drunken undulations. It was the endless march now, that grueling overland crawl where every ridge crested promised more of the same. White plains stitched with wind-sculpted sastrugi, those frozen furrows like the land's own harrowed brow. Treks began at the gloaming's edge, when the sun, that teasing orb, hovered just shy of the rim, casting a buttery smear that gilded the snow without warming it. Clans moved in waves, elders dictating pace with a raised mitt or a grunted hup, the rhythm a slow simmer against the cold's insistent creep. Sensory flood, the spongy give of tussock underfoot, deceptive as a false friend, hiding ankle-twisting voids, the faint, yeasty whiff of dwarf willow crushed beneath boots, releasing a ghost of summer's green, the distant, hollow boom of a crevasse belching wind like a cavernous sigh. Modern aside, picture your daily commute, but swap traffic for timberline wolves shadowing the flanks, their amber eyes glinting like errant stars. No podcasts to drown the howls, just the crunch and the chant to keep sanity stitched. Dodging crevasses was dance as much as drudgery. Those gaping fissures veiled by snow bridges thin as trust. Scouts young bucks like Atka from the kayak forges, now leggy with Tundra miles probed ahead with harpoon poles, thrusting deep to test the span's give. A solid thunk meant passage. A hollow echo, detour, veering wide around blue-black throats that plunged to depths where echoes mocked the lost. One such bridge, arched like a frozen rainbow over a yawning gap, creaked under keyless weight mid-crossing, snow crumbling in lazy cascades that vanished into the void. The clan froze, breaths held like offerings, until the span held, prompting a collective exhale that fogged the air like dragon's breath. Wolves, those opportunistic shades, prowled the fringes. Packs of grey ghosts with ribs like washboards, drawn by the scent of sweat and sinew, their yowls, a nocturnal opera that set dogs to frantic barking. Hunters flanked the line, harpoons loosing grips, eyes scanning the white blur for yellow stares. One lunge from a bold alpha, and it was parry or perish. The clash, a flurry of ivory and fang that left the air thick with musk and muffled growls. Mainstream history maps this inland push with precision. By 2000 BC, Thule wanderers had fanned across Alaska's north slope, their camps ringed hearths, and bone scatters dated via volcanic ash layers that blanket the tundra like time's confetti, proving these treks weren't aimless, but arrow straight toward caribou carving grounds and whale migration routes. Artifacts trail them, soapstone lamps etched with star motifs, mirroring Siberian kin, a portable pantheon carried on backs bowed by burden. But the quirky fringe, elders' yarns, spun in the hush of skin tents, murmur of tundra tricksters, mischievous wind spirits that shifted crevasses overnight, rearranging the land like a petulant child with blocks only appeased by offerings of polished caribou antler tossed into the cracks. Superstition or sharp observation of glacial whim? In the endless white, where shadows played false, a little spirit bargaining probably felt like buying insurance with a side of folklore flair. Overhead, stars wheeled like silent sentinels, their circuits the trekker's true compass, Polaris the fixed gaze, Dipper the dipping guide. Constellations parading in nightly reviews that dictated dawn's direction. Knights camped in snow trenches scooped shoulder deep. Walls patted smooth against the wind's probe. Families burrowed under hides that smelled of salt and smoke from the shore's farewell fires. Blubber lamps flickered low, casting amber pools where shadows danced like half-remembered dreams. The wicks hiss a white noise against the wolves' distant chorus. Meals were mobile affairs. Pemmican balls, pounded meat, and fat rolled in berry dust, popped into mouths like chewy comets sustaining. If a touch, monotonous, chasing away the gnaw of hunger with a fatty bloom on the tongue. Sensory nestle, the prick of frost on lashes as sleep tugged, the soft rustle of parkas shifting in the pile, the faint, sweet char of roasting willow twigs for tea that steamed like whispered hopes. Laughter, that portable hearth, flickered in the lulls soft at first, then rolling like thunder muffled in quilts. Imagine a scout, Atka again for the callback, poling a suspect bridge only to plunge knee-deep into a slushy sinkhole, emerging with a beard like a snowman's envy. The line erupted in chuckles that warmed the marrow, his grumbles drowned in the glee. "Tundra's got jokes too, eh?" his sister quipped, hauling him clear with a mittened tug. "Next time, test with your ego it's lighter than your feet." Second jest, around a midday halt, where the wind dropped to a sigh, and blubber chunks sizzled on shared hot stones. Why do wolves hate tundra treks? Too many howling delays, much like Kuzenkilas stories, which circle longer than the dipper. These ripples, gentle as melt streams, bound the weary, turning miles into memories etched lighter than the load. Scholars poring over maps in heated halls still circle this phase like wary caribou. Historians still argue whether these overland hauls followed fixed migration corridors etched by megafauna ghosts, or improvised paths dictated by whim and weather, with pollen cores suggesting herd trails but oral epics favoring the stars' sway. Was it landscape or lore that led? The debate drifts on, as untethered as a loose sled dog. The march ground on. Ridges conquered one frozen hump at a time, each crest revealing more of the same. Undulant white laced with black basalt spines. Rivers frozen to glassy highways that cracked under sled runners like brittle laughter. Wolves tested flanks at dusk, a bold pair nipping at the rear until a harpoon's whoosh sent them slinking. Tails low the skirmish, leaving a hunter's arm scored but spirit unbroken, the wound bound with moss and murmured chants to Polaris for mending. Families adapted, children now toddling the trails with tiny packs, aping the adult's stride, while babes rode high in umiak frames repurposed as travois. The creak of lashings a cradle song, quirky pauses marked the miles. Fringe rituals of star pauses, where clans halted at Dipper's nadir to etch thanks on ice with urine streams. Warm script freezing to filigree, a fleeting graffiti to the guardians above. Worked its magic or not, it beat plodding in silence, right? Deeper inland, the land grew stingier, blizzards ambushing like old foes, whiteouts that erased the line's tail, forcing tight huddles where bodies stacked like cordwood, breaths shared in a steamy cocoon. Emergence meant recounting, the lost found by shouts and star squints, harpoons probing the drift for buried kin. One storm pinned Keeler's clan for days, the world a swirling soup where up was guesswork, down a prayer emerging to skies scrubbed clean, Dipper wheeling on as if nothing amiss, and in the aftermath, mirth bubbled. A wind-whipped parka, ballooned like a rogue sail, sending its owner tumbling ass over into a drift, prompting hoots that echoed clear. Third joke. Soft as the settling snow, what do you call a blizzard's favorite game? Hide and freeze, but remember those wolves? They play for keeps, unlike my navigation after one too many pemmican naps. Endurance etched them finer. Packs lightening as provisions dwindled. Bellies teaching the art of want, yet the stars held counsel nightly. Sentinels silent as judges, their wheel turning the treks toward promise. Faint smoke wisps on distant bluffs, hints of herds thundering unseen. Crevasses dodged, wolves warded. The tundra yielded paths like reluctant confessions, each mile a stitch in the saga's skin. Families, faces, wind burned to leather, scanned the vault where Polaris gleamed, lower now in this broadening bowl. Dippers pour an endless benediction. Blizzard's breath faded to memory's edge. But the March marrow pulsed on, pulling them through white veils toward hunts that waited, harpoons hungry, in the land's deep heart. The endless plain whispered on, horizons curling like invitations half-scribbled, wolves' eyes fading to pinpricks in the gloam. And overhead, those wheeling lights silent, steadfast, charted the course, one frozen step at a time, into the trial's thickening weave, into the land's deep heart, where the tundra's whisper hardened to a hush broken only by the faint, rhythmic thud of hooves on crust. The clans crested the final ridge and beheld the herds vast, swirling clouds of caribou that blanketed the white like living fog, their antlers a tangled forest against the pearl sky. Polaris, that tireless sentinel, hung poised in the vault, casting a silver thread over the migration's endgame, the hunts that would bind or break them. Keyless folk, packs frayed at the edges like their nerves, fanned into position downwind, the air thick with the musky thunder of the beast's warm hides steaming in the subzero bite, nostrils flaring, pink puffs that hung like ghosts. No more the endless plod. Now it was the harpoon's hour, those ivory-forged familiars from Siberian sands slung low, lines coiled neat as sleeping snakes. Families staked the drama's edges, women and elders crouched in snow-scooped blinds, breaths shallow to muffle the gale's sigh. While hunters Atka among them, his kayak scars still pink under parka folds, crept belly down. Mukluks whispering over sastrugi like lovers' secrets. One errant throw here, in this frozen theatre, and a family's winter larder crumbled to whispers. The ice's embrace, claiming not just the hunter, but the hearth he fed. Subzero hunts unfolded like taut bowstrings, each foray a saga scripted in sweat and starlight. Dawn, that reluctant smear on the horizon, broke cold as a slap. The sun, a pale disk that mocked the chill, barely nudging thermometers below -40, where spit crackled mid-air and metal fused to flesh. Hunters rose before the light, rubbing seal oil into mittens for grip that wouldn't betray, the slick sheen catching the dipper's last dip like dew on a web. Kayaks, dragged from coastal caches or lashed anew from willow whips, skimmed frozen rivers now, their hides patched with optimism against the flows that bumped like insistent drunks. Sensory plunge, the glassy grind of runners on ice, the sharp ozone tang of impending snow, laced with the herd's earthy reek, the numb prickle in toes that screamed move or lose. Modern aside, forget your heated garage and Gore-Tex. These chases were raw-dogging winter, with tools that make a Swiss Army knife look lazy, harpoons doubling as probes, snowshoes as stretchers, every hunt a high-stakes improv, where the script wrote itself in blood and blubber. The caribou runs hit like avalanches in slow motion, thousands strong, splitting the plain in a brown blur that raised dust. Clouds of powdered snow, hooves shattering crust in a percussion that vibrated bones. Atka, leading a pod of young hunters, bellied into position on a rise, harpoon balanced light as a promise, line anchored to his belt with a slipknot born of bitter lessons. The lead bulls, antlers like crowns of bone, bugled deep calls that rolled like thunder under the skin, drawing cows and calves in a tide that swallowed the white. Breath hitched, mittens flexed, then the throw. A fluid arc that hummed through the air, ivory head tumbling end over end to bury in a flank with a thud muffled by fur. The toggle flipped, line sang taut, yanking Atka forward in a skid that sprayed ice diamonds, the beast bucking like a storm in hide. Clan whoops rose faint from the blinds, a chorus to haul the prize. dogs loose to aid the drag, their paws churning snow to froth, while the kill steamed on the crust, innards a hot bloom that fogged the scene like a fever dream. Butchery swift blades parting hide in efficient zips, meat sectioned for travois, the liver claimed first for its vitamin pulse, raw and quivering, passed like a talisman to steady shaking hands. Mainstream history hunts these sagas in the strata. By 1500 BC, Thule descendants had mastered the caribou chase across Alaska's interior, with kill sites boneyards layered thick as quilts, dated by reindeer, moss growth rings, and volcanic tephra, proving these weren't scattershot strikes but seasonal symphonies synced to herd migrations, sustaining clans through the long night with hides for tents and sinew for strings. These hunts weren't sport. They were symposia with survival. Every sinew harvested, even the stomach's curdled milk boiled for broth that warmed like whispered lore. But the quirky fringe, some tales, tucked in the embers of elders' pipes, hint at harpoon whispers, a ritual where hunters hum to their ivory heads before the throw, claiming the vibration tuned the point to the prey's heartbeat, making it seek like a heat-guided curse. Fringe physics or familial placebo? In the blur of a run, when your family's feast hung on the flip of a barb, a little melodic mojo probably felt like stacking the deck with destiny. Walrus hunts on the pack edges pushed the peril higher. Those behemoths hauled out on floes that carved without warning, their tusks curved scimitars glinting in the low light. Kayaks slipped silent across the leads, paddles muffled in fur wraps, the sea a mosaic of blue cracks under grey pans that shifted like puzzle pieces in a sigh. Keeler, veteran of Strait's teeth, poled his craft close, harpoon poised for the upthrust lunge, the beast's bellow a guttural quake that set floes trembling, flippers slapping water to froth. Throw landed true or wide. True meant a frenzy of line and leverage, the walrus diving deep to test the hunter's anchor, kayak bobbing like a cork in the beast's wake. Wide, and it was scramble time, poling frantic from jaws that could shear bone like birch. Success hauled aboard in slabs of blubber that sloshed the hold. The fatty reek a promise of lamps that burn months, oil scooped warm into gut skin flasks. Sensory storm. The slap of cold spray beading on brows. The metallic screech of ice on ivory. The heave of gut as you gut the gut. A slippery ballet where one slip meant joining the feast uninvited. Laughter, that sly saboteur of solemnity, snuck in post-kill, when adrenaline ebbed to shakes, and the clan gathered round the steaming carcass. Picture Atka, line still smoking from the strain, only to trip over his own snowshoe in the drag's aftermath, face planting into a snowbank that puffed up like a pillow fight gone wrong. The hunter's guffaws rolled soft across the pack, warming the wind's edge. Graceful as a walrus waltz. Brother, Keeler teased, clapping his back with a mitt that left an oil smear. Next hunt, tie the shoes to your harpoon, remember those kayak forges? Leaks we can patch, pride not so much. Second jest, murmured over blubber chunks roasted on a flow fire, flames licking blue from the fat's pure burn. Why do caribou always outrun the jokes? They're herd to catch, unlike Uncle Two Peaks' puns, which gallop right over the point. These chuckles, light as falling flakes, stitched the scars, turning near misses into nightly yarns that lulled the young to sleep. Scholars, knee-deep in their archival snowdrifts, still stalk the subtleties. Historians still argue whether these subzero pursuits leaned on communal drives, vast corrals of snow and stone funneling herds, or lone wolf ambushes tuned to starlit solos, with ethnographic echoes split between epic cycles and solitary sagas. Was it horde or heroics that fed the fire? The bones bury the answer, layer by layer. Seal hunts on breathing holes capped the cycle. those pinpoint vents in the fast ice where fossids surfaced for air. Rings of snow polished smooth by flippers' ghosts. Hunters sprawled prone for hours. Harpoons vertical like patient spears. The world narrowed to the holes, dark eye a bubble rising. Then the whiskered nose, the lunge in a heartbeat's blur. Miss, and the seal vanished in a splash that mocked you. Hit, and the line dove deep. The way to meditation on freeze where mittens stiffened to boards and thoughts wandered to Siberian twilights. Emergence meant a slick haul. The seal's sleek form dragged to a waiting sled. Its eyes filmed milky in the cold. Fur parted for the kill's quick mercy. Families feasted communal, meat shared in slices thin as trust. The broth's steam a veil for stories swapped like currency. Doom's shadow loomed in every cast. A bungled throw on thin ice. Flow cracking under the struggle. Plunging hunter and hope into the numbing black clans, diving with ropes and resolve, hauling kin from the drink, where minutes meant limbs or life. One such saga etched Kilas clan. A young thrower, line snarled in panic, dragged under only for Atka to anchor the drag. The pull a symphony of grunts and groans until surfacing, blue-lipped but breathing. The seal forfeit, but the brother gained. Quirky aftermath. A fringe vow to feed the whole with a sliver of every kill. Tossed back as thanks slippery tribute to the ice's whim. Ensuring future breaths. Blizzards crashed the hunts unbidden. Whiteouts turning trails to traps. Hunters adrift in their own backyards. Harpoons useless as umbrellas in the swirl. Survival then was burrow and burn. Snow caves tunneled swift. Blubber lamps the only sun. The way to wager on clearing skies where Polaris would re-emerge like a forgiven friend. And in those caves, mirth flickered dim. A wind-whipped hood, flapping like a flag of surrender. Sending its owner into a sneezing fit that shook the walls, prompting muffled snickers. Third joke breathed soft against the lamp's glow. What do you call a harpoon in a blizzard? A pointless pursuit, but don't tell the seals. They've got enough chill already, like my feet after one too many waiting games. These trials tempered them. Hunts, not just hauls, but hymns to the harpoons. Grace ivory arcs under starlit scrutiny. Families fed or forsaken in the throw's true flight. Caribou clouds thinned to stragglers. Walrus flows locked tight. Seal holes iced over. But the sagas stacked like cordwood, warming the winter's weave. Polaris gleamed on, dipper dipping its paw over prairies now patrolled. The ice's embrace held at bay by heroes' hands. Yet the land, sated for a season, nudged them coastal again. Hearths calling like old flames, villages waiting in the frost's forgiving fold. Yet the land, sated for a season, nudged them coastal again. Hearths calling like old flames, villages waiting in the frost's forgiving fold. Those emergent outposts, rising from the gravelly embrace of Alaskas. Shores like half-remembered sighs. Kilas clan. Bellies rounded with the hunt's hard-won bounty slabs of caribou slung in salt-crusted packs. Walrus blubber oozing from gut sacks like reluctant gold. Traced the frozen rivers back to the sea's murmur, where ice edges gnawed the land in eternal hunger. Polaris, ever the steadfast overseer, dipped toward the horizon in this coastal cradle. The Big Dippers pour now a gentle arc over bays that cradled driftwood like gathered bones. Families, wind scoured to the quick, crested dunes fringed with sea oats frozen stiff, the air a tangy slap of brine and kelp rot, undercut by the faint, smoky prelude of fires kindled in memory. It was birthing time for these outposts. That quiet alchemy of turf and tenacity where sod huts humped from the earth like hibernating beasts, their domes a bulwark against the Arctic's chill grip winds that howled like scorned spirits, clawing at any warmth with fingers of frost. The coastal verges, those liminal strips where tundra kissed the tide, became canvases for the clan's quiet conquest. No thunderous parades. Just the methodical scrape of ulus on frozen sod, women slicing rectangles of permafrost-tough turf in slabs thick as resolve, their blades singing a low hymn against the fibrous bind. Men hauled frames of whalebone and willow ribs scavenged from beach high tides, lashed with sinew that creaked like old joints, erecting low walls that bowed inward, humble as whispers. The air hummed with labor's rhythm, the thud of mallets driving pegs, the earthy musk of upturned soil releasing a ghost of summer's green, the distant crash of surf pounding black basalt like an impatient drum, sensory cocoon, the gritty slide of dirt under nails, the faint, metallic bite of frost on lips as breaths fogged the work, the soft give of moss chinking gaps like natural cork. Modern aside, building here made your weekend cabin kit look like Lego for giants. No power tools, just elbow grease and a view that frees your blueprint mid-draw, turning architects into archaeologists overnight. Sod huts rose in clusters. Semi-subterranean scoops dug into berms that faced the lee of prevailing gales. Entrances tunneled low like rabbit warrens to trap the heat's feeble escape. Roofs domed with overlapping turf, weighted by stones that clattered in the wind like dice in fate's palm, while interiors hollowed to fit the quillick, that soapstone lamp, oval as a mother's hip, cradling a wick of moss fed by seal oil that bloomed golden against the gloom. First fires kindled there, embers coaxed from flint strikes that sparked like captured stars, the blaze leaping to life with a crackle that chased shadows to the corners. Families tumbled in, shedding parkas that steamed in the sudden warmth, the space a womb of woolly hush where the air thickened with the sweet char of blubber rendering slow, mingling with the cured leather tang of drying hides stretched on frames. Shared fires warded the grip. Circles of stone-ringed hearths where clans converged, passing bone needles threaded with gut to stitch the night's mending, the glow painting faces in flickering amber that softened the strait's gaunt lines. Mainstream history roots these outposts in the record. By 1000 BC, Thule settlements dotted the Alaskan coast from Norton Sound to the Chukchi Rim, with sodhouse rings, post molds, and hearth pits excavated to reveal a network of seasonal hubs that pulsed with trade in ivory and iron pyrites, linking coasts in a web of whalebone and whale song. These weren't mere shelters. They were societal synapses, where hunts converged into communal caches, sustaining through the polar night's unyielding pall. But the quirky fringe, whispers in the firelight, carried from elder to ear like contraband, tell of hearth guardians' tiny ivory figures, carved as seal pups with star-etched eyes, tucked beneath the quillick, to feed on dripped oil, ensuring the flame never guttered in a gale. Superstition or savvy insulation. In a world where one failed spark meant a night in the freeze, a little talismanic tuck probably warmed the soul as much as the stones. As outposts thickened along the bays, clusters of humped domes like a litter of pups against the dunes, life wove its warp and weft. Women foraged the littoral at low tides, baskets swaying with mussels pried from rocks slick as sin, their shells clacking like castanets in the wind, while men patrolled the pack for stray seals, kayaks slipping the leads like shadows on silk. Evenings drew the village inward, tunnels funneling figures to the central longhouse, a grander sod beast. Its walls bowed wide for gatherings where drums of stretched gut thrummed low, echoing the surf space. Shared fires there weren't just heat. They were hearth-heart, blubber-fed beacons where stories sloshed like stew in horn bowls, the smoke curling lazy to vent holes that pierced the dome like breathing pores. Sensory embrace. The pop of fat spitting in the flames, the woolly rustle of bodies shifting close, the faint briny steam rising from a cauldron of stewed kelp, and ringed seal, a broth thick as kinship, sipped slow to chase the day's chill. Laughter, that sly ember, sparked in the glow soft at first, then blooming like aurora's fringe. Envision a builder mid-roof thatch, only for a gust to snatch his mitt and send it sailing into the tide like a wayward gull, prompting the crew's chuckles to roll warm across the berm. Fetch it quick. Inuk, a woman called Ulu, paused mid-slice. Or the seal claim it for her own hearth. Remember those Bering throws? Even harpoons missed sometimes. Second jest murmured around the longhouse fire where shadows played tag on the walls. Why do sod huts never complain about the cold? They've got turf enough to tough it out, unlike Cousin Atka's socks, which surrender faster than a walrus to a whisper. These quips, light as the oil's flicker, knit the nights tighter, turning labour's ache to law's lift. Deeper in the frost-veiled archives, scholars huddle like villagers at a blaze. Historians still argue whether these coastal births sprang from single clan anchors, solitary sod strongholds, swelling organic or migratory pulses that seeded chains of outposts like beads on a sinew string, with midden depths suggesting bursts, but oral maps favouring the flow. Was it settle or swarm? The turf, turning slow underfoot, keeps counsel close, villages pulsed with purpose, outposts evolving from hasty scoops to hardy holds, cache pits ringed with bone fences to thwart foxes' sly raids. Their lids of lashed hides weighted against the wind's pry. Umiak racks arcing like skeletal bows along the high tide line, boats nested safe from the sea's sulk. Children, those small whirlwinds of the village, scampered the tunnels at play, aping hunts with stick harpoons that clattered on stone floors, while elders oversaw the Umialik, the whale captain's emergence, anointing leaders with oil-smeared brows under Polaris gaze. Quirky rhythms marked the seasons. Fringe festivals of fire dancing, where flames were fed aromatic tundra herbs to scent the smoke with sage and sweetgrass, claiming it lured fair winds, a smoky aromatherapy that make your spa day sniff in envy. Blizzards battered the domes like jealous suitors, snow-piling drifts that buried entrances, forcing the village inward to a warren of warmth where shared fires burned double duty. The Korlik's glow, the only clock in the endless dark. Emergence meant shovel and song, clans digging out in unison, the scrape of bone on white, a chorus to the clearing vault, where Dipper dipped renewed. One such siege pinned Kilas outpost for weeks. The world a muffled cocoon where games of bone dice clattered soft, bets wagered in tales rather than tally emerging to a landscape sculpted anew, dunes reshaped like sandcastles after the tide. And in the berry, mirth muffled the moan. A toddler, stacking snow bricks for a mini hut, only to topple his tower into the elder's lap, prompting snickers that shook the walls like aftershocks. Third joke, breathed low against the lamp's hush. What do you call a blizzard-trapped village? A cool commune, but don't tell the winds. They've got a grip tighter than my grip on that last blubber chunk after a long hunt. These hearths, ignited against the grip, bound the birthing tight sod walls, sweating faint in the heat's hold. Fires shared like secrets under the stars in different wheel. Outposts fanned along the coast, bays cradling clusters from isolated scoops to thriving knots where trade whispers crossed the ice. Ivory toggles bartered for copper nuggets from inland kin, the exchange lit by aurora's veil. Families, faces rounded by the routine, scanned the pack from hut doors framed in frost, harpoons leaning like sentries, the sea's sigh a lullaby laced with longing. Polaris gleamed low. Dippers pour a benediction over the domes, while the chill's fingers, warded by flame and fellowship, retreated to the fringes, leaving space for songs to stir. Epics uncoiling like smoke from the shared blaze, pulling the saga seaward once more. The coastal hush deepened. Outposts etched, enduring against the frost's fondle. Hearths pulsing like hearts in the land's vast chest. Winds whispered on, but the grip loosened. Villages standing sentinel, their fires a faint flicker to the wandering stars. The wandering stars, those celestial nomads wheeling lazy circuits over the sentinel villages, seemed to lean closer on nights when the aurora unfurled its green silken veil, draping the sky like a shaman's shawl tossed in a dream. In the hush of those outposts, where sod domes exhaled faint plumes of hearth smoke into the indigo bowl, the epic songs stirred like embers coaxed from ash, their melodies uncoiling, slow and sinuous from the throats of elders gathered in the longhouse's golden core. Keeler, his scar a silver crescent under the quillick's glow, would lean forward on his bone stool, voice gravelly as tundra gravel, beginning the weave, not with fanfare, but a low hum that vibrated the turf walls, drawing families inward like moths to a blubber flame. The air thickened then, heavy with the sweet char of oil wick and the woolly musk of bodies pressed close, the surf's distant sigh a bass undertone to the chant's rising cadence. These were the oral tapestries of passage, threads of voyage spun from memory's loom, chanted under auroras that danced like eavesdropping spirits, binding generations in a starry lore that outlasted the ice itself. Songs began in the gloaming's hush, when the sun dipped just enough to tease the dark, and the villages settled into their woolly hush parkas shed to reveal tunics soft with wear, children curled like seal pups at knees, eyes wide as the dipper's bowl. Elders, faces mapped with the straits, fine lines and tundra's wind etch, passed the lead like a shared pipe, one voice threading the melody, others layering harmony in a polyphonic braid that hummed through the bones. The airs were spare, no lutes or flutes to gild them, just the throat's raw timbre, pitched to carry over gales or cradle in caves, words half sung, half spoken in a cadence that lulled like waves on gravel. Sensory immersion, the faint vibration under palms pressed to the earthen floor, the warm puff of breath on neighbors' necks, the acrid tang of sweat-laced hides mingling with the lamp's honeyed melt. Modern aside, imagine your Spotify unwind playlist, but swap algorithms for Aurora Sync no ads. Just ancestors dropping bars about blizzards that make your snowblower weep. The epics unfurled in verses vast as the migrations themselves, recounting the Siberian cradle under endless twilight, where families etched Polaris into palms like secret ink. From the Chukchi's grey lap, Keeler would intone, voice dipping low like the dipper's handle. We slipped the moorings, Umiak's fat with dream and dread, the nail above our prow like a harpoon's ghost. Listeners leaned in, the song painting the strait in strokes of sound, swells rearing white-maned, blizzards swallowing kin in white gulps, the crack of flows like bones under boot. Heroes emerged in the weave Atka's forebears. Those kayak forges turned to legend, hurling lines that sang through storms. Lost souls redeemed by star whispers, their ghosts paddling phantom boats under the aurora's fringe. The chorus swelled then, a refrain that rolled like thunder muffled in moss. Stars call, we carve the cold. Dipper paws, we claim the bold. Children, fingers tracing invisible arcs on thighs, committed it wrote, the melody a mnemonic map more faithful than any etched bone. Auroras amplified the rite, those ethereal banners rippling in greens and purples that bled into the snow like spilled ink, their hush broken only by the faint crackle of solar wind nature's own ASMR. If auroras had a Patreon, clans spilled from domes to witness, blankets dragged to the packed yard where the sky show pulsed overhead, songs rising unbidden as if the lights demanded duet. Elders claimed the borealis listened, weaving the chants into its glow, turning personal passage into cosmic chronicle. One such night, as veils billowed low enough to brush the ice, Keeler's voice cracked a tale of the strait's jealous bride, a fringe myth where the sea spurned for tundra's call, lashed waves like tresses in rage, only to relent when sung to with dipper's paw. The clan hummed along, voices blending with the wind's sigh, the aurora seeming to shimmer brighter, as if applauding from the void. Quirky tidbit, some singers, in the song's fever, dripped blubber onto tongues mid-chant, claiming the oil's slick sweetened the timbre, a vocal lozenge with a side of calories, turning balladeers into buttery bards. Mainstream history harmonizes this lore in layers. By 500 BC, Thule oral traditions had crystallized into epic cycles, preserved in ethnographic recordings from 19th century explorers that echo motifs from Siberian shamanism, star-guided voyages as foundational myths, their structures paralleling Indo-European sagas, but tuned to Arctic timbre, proving these songs weren't whimsy, but worldview. Encoding, navigation, and kinship, in rhythms that survived the oral chain unbroken. These tapestries weren't static. They evolved with each telling, verses accruing like barnacles on a hull, new hunts slotted into old straits, blizzards personalized with a clan's ghosts, but the debates simmer soft in academic embers. Historians still argue whether these epics originated as shamanic trance songs, trance-induced visions of migration mapped to melody, or practical pedagogies disguised as poetry. Ethnomusicologists split on the score, with waveform analyses favoring the former's hypnotic pulse over the latter's rote drill, generations bound in the bind. The songs serving as elders' ink and child's primer. Grandmothers crooning lullabies laced with bearings, bite to babes at the breast. The milk's warmth underscoring words of walrus halls and wolf wards. Youths, those leggy apprentices from tundra treks, tested their throats in apprentice airs, voices cracking like thin ice under elders' fond squint. Softer on the swell, boy let the wave rise in the word, not rush it like a harpoon green. Evenings in the longhouse bloomed with duets, fathers and daughters trading verses on village hearths. The kuliks flicker sinking to the beat like a metronome of marrow, sensory fade. The subtle shift of weight on reed mats. The faint, resinous whiff of willow smoke from the vent. The collective inhale before the chorus drop a breath held village-wide, released in harmony that hummed the walls. Callbacks wove through. Remember Kilas Bridge Creek? A singer would tease, slipping the near miss into a verse, turning peril to punchline in the poem's fold. Laughter, that gentle rogue, threaded the tapestry's light, slipping in like a sly rhyme, easing the epic's weight. Picture a young chanter, puffed with pride, belting a straight-crossing stanza only to flub the dipper's dip, twisting paw to paw in a gale of her own making, the longhouse dissolving in chuckles that warmed the wick. "Ah, little wave," an auntie quipped, wiping mirth tears with her cuff. "You've drowned the stars in pity next time. Blame the aurora, not your tongue." "Second jest," murmured, as the aurora peaked and the song paused for breath. Why do epic songs never get lost? They've got verse for every horizon, unlike Cousin Inuk's directions, which detour through every blizzard joke. These ripples, soft as the borealis edge, lightened the lore, ensuring the bind didn't chafe but cradled, generations giggling into the genealogy. Fringe flourishes fringed the chants. Some troops, under full auroral bloom, incorporated light echoes, call and response, where singers mimicked the skies, shimmer with falsetto trills, claiming it summoned fair hunts come dawn. Worked its whimsy or not, it turned the night to theatre, villages alight with voices that vaulted the vault. As seasons cycled, songs migrated with the clans, verses packed in throats like pemmican in pouches, carried to new outposts where they'd unfurl anew, auroras or no, binding the born to the buried in starry script. Deeper into the weave, the epic's etched identity eternal. Voyages not as ended but echoing, each chant a portal to the strait's salt and tundra's tang. Polaris, the recurring refrain that pinned the poem to the pole. Families, faces flushed from the fire's kiss, dispersed to domes with melodies humming in heads like half-sung hymns. dreams laced with lines that led across frozen thresholds. One aurora-veiled eve, as Keeler closed a cycle with the ice oath's vow that slippery pact from the shore claims. Tongues to flow the clan rose in a final swell, voices soaring to kiss the lights above. The sky, in silent salute, rippled wider, greens bleeding to violet sighs, as if the stars themselves swayed to the saga's sway. These oral looms, chanted soft under the dancing veils, didn't just recount, they rekindled the passage's pulse made present. Generations grafted to the Grand Trek's graft. Villages, their hearths hushed post-chant, slumbered under the wheel, dipper dipping low, Polaris steady as a sung promise. Winds whispered the refrains onward, carrying threads to horizons yet unhinted, where fjords waited like half-open books, ready for the saga's next stitch. The aurora faded slow, a curtain call in the calm, leaving the night to the stars' soft scrutiny and the songs ever echoing in the heart's quiet hum. Winds whispered the refrains onward, carrying threads to horizons yet unhinted, where fjords waited like half-open books, ready for the saga's next stitch. The eastward pull that tugged at the village's hearthstrings like a tide on a reluctant shore. Centuries had spun their wheels since the Alaskan outposts first hunkered against the gales. But the stars' call, that persistent hum from Polaris and the Dipper's dip, echoed in the bones of new generations, urging clans to load umiaks once more with the weight of wanderlust. By now, the Thule had woven a web across the north, from Bering Strait to the Canadian archipelago, their kayaks slicing the Beaufort's bight, harpoons claiming beluga pods that thrashed silver in summer swells. But the frontier's fringe beckoned harder. Whispers from Dorset kin those pale shadows of earlier Arctic folk traded in ivory beads, spoke of lands where ice birthed mountains of blue, fjords carving the coast like a god's idle knife. Keyless descendants. Let's name a new threadbearer. The keen-eyed navigator, Nuna, felt the itch in her marrow as auroras painted the vault in prophecy greens, the song's refrains twisting to verses of eastern vales where memory met myth in the merge of new horizons. The expansions unfolded not in thunder but in the quiet creak of lashings tightened for the long haul, clans splintering from coastal knots to flotillas that hugged the ice's ragged hem. Umiaks, those broad-bellied workhorses from the kayak forges of old, bloated with tents of oiled gut and caches of pemmican that stuck to teeth like stubborn dreams, slipped moorings under skies, smeared perpetual pearl. Kayaks flanked like sleek guardians, their hides patched with memories of straits, storms, paddles dipping in a rhythm that hummed the old chants. Dipper's paw now pointing not west but east, across the labyrinth of islands that strung like beads from the Canadian throat to Greenland's icy jaw. Nuna's armada, a dozen boats strong, threaded the narrows first, the air sharpening to a knife-edge tang of glacial flour, where rivers of melt tumbled from highlands into the sea, foaming white against basalt cliffs that reared like frozen applause. Sensory drift, the slap of swell on hide, cool as a lover's sigh, the faint chalky mist beading on lashes like diamond dust, the low groan of bergs carving distant, a bass note underscoring the paddle's hush. Modern aside, navigating this without a chart plotter, you'd be yelling Siri, where's the fjord? While these folks let the stars do the heavy lifting, turning GPS envy into genuine awe. Fjords unfolded like reluctant scrolls, deep gashes in the lands, green-black hide where the sea probed inland, walls sheer as dreams deferred, fringed with birches that clung stubborn to crevices, their leaves a fleeting gold in the brief blaze of summer. Clans beached on gravel, tongues thrust into the drink, the grind of keels a punctuation to arrival, harpoons planted tip down like claims on the unknown. Here, myth and memory merged in the haze. Dorset echoes in abandoned middens shell heaps, etched with faded spirals that mirrored the aurora's curl. Whispered of predecessors hod faded like morning fog, leaving tools blunt as forgotten oaths. Nuna's folk scavenged them, ivory adzes hafted anew, blending old bone with new sinew in a craft that honored the ghosts. Hunts quickened in these veiled valleys, caribou ghosts on upland moors, their hooves a muffled drum on sphagnum, brought down with throws that echoed the harpoon hero's trials. Seals basking on offshore pans, their barks a chorus to the kill's wet thunk, but the whales are those leviathans of the fjord mouths. Bowheads gliding like shadowed cathedrals demanded the epic's full measure. Umiaks poling close in the upwells swirl, harpoons arcing under Polaris approving gleam. Mainstream history charts this final thrust with carbon's ink. Around 1000 AD, Thule migrants surged into Greenland's northwest, their sites sod longhouses, clustered in fjord nooks from Thule to Upernavik, dated by Norse sagas and stratified turf that layers like a cake of conquest, proving these expansions weren't drift but drive, overtaking Dorset holdouts in a cultural cascade that repopulated the ice cap's edge with star-savvy successors. These outposts, from pit houses to whalebone-framed halls, pulsed with trade nets that snagged iron from Viking dross and amber from Baltic ghosts, weaving the Arctic into a wider world. But the quirky fringe, tales chanted in the merges, hush speak of fjord sirens, ethereal calls from the deep, luring kayaks to hidden coves with melodies that mimicked the epic songs, revealing caches of Dorset lore etched on bone, maps of under-ice currents, bartered only to those who answered in kind. Fact or fjord fever? In the echo chamber of those sheer walls, a little mythical misdirection probably spiced the scouting better than a bad latte run. Navigating the narrows tested the merger's mettle, currents ripping like jealous riptides through straits, pinched narrow as a grudge, flows grinding in the throat like molars on grit. Nuna, scar inherited from Keelas line like a family heirloom, scanned the vault mid-paddle Polaris lower now, hugging the rim like a secret Perseus, dipper wheeling its paw over peaks that pierced the clouds like ivory spears. Blizzards ambushed in the fjord's fold, whiteouts turning walls to whispers, boats lashed raft-like in the swirl, families huddling under hides that snapped like sails in the gale's tantrum. Emergence meant recounting the fleet. Lost kayaks hailed by horn blasts that boomed off the stone. The way to wager on memory's map. One such siege pinned Nuna's lead Umiak against a berg's blue flank, the ice groaning like a beast in labor, until a crack parted the white veil, revealing a cove where Dorset rings lay half-buried, their stones aligned to the dipper's dip, as if the old ones had waited for the song's arrival. Laughter, that fjord-filling buoy, bubbled in the lulls soft against the echo's edge. Picture a paddler, mid-narrows lunge, mistaking a driftwood snag for a walrus fluke and hurling his mock harpoon only for it to thunk harmless into kelp, the beast unmasking as a sodden log that bobbed mockingly. The flotilla's chuckles rolled off the walls, amplified to a canyon roar that chased the gloom. Steady. Kivak, Nuna called, her voice threading the mirth like a needle. Save the heroics for belugas, remember Atka's pebble hunt? Even Tundra laughed at that. Second jest, murmured around a beach fire where blubber sizzled on basalt spits, flames painting the fjord's throat in orange sighs. Why do fjords never share their secrets? They're too deep in thought, much like Uncle Keelas stories, which echo longer than these walls. These quips, light as the mist off the melt, eased the merge, turning myth's murmur to memory's mate. Scholars, tracing the tides, turn in tomes thick as ice cores, still navigate the narrows of nuance. Historians still argue whether this eastward wave was climate's cruel cue, a medieval warm spell greening the coasts for the bold or cultural conquest. Thule tech trumping Dorset drift in a clash of kayaks and cunning, with pollen proxies warming to the former but artifact overlaps favoring the fray. Was it thaw or takeover? The fjords, folding their lips, leave the lore to linger. Horizons merged in the fjord's heart. Outposts birthing like afterthoughts. Sod clusters in the crooks of the land's arm. Hearths kindled with willow scrub that snapped aromatic, the smoke curling to kiss the aurora's hem. Here, myth wove tighter with the daily. Songs adapted, verses slotting Dorset dances into the strait's swell. Children tracing hybrid maps on snow with mitten stubs Polaris pinned. Dipper dipped, now laced with fjord-forked lines. Hunts deepened the bond. Narwhal tusks, those spiraled unicorns of the deep, harpooned in upwell hunts where the sea boiled silver, their spirals carved into amulets that merged old star lore with new narwhal whispers. Quirky rites marked the meld. Fringe feasts of ghost stew, where Dorset found bones were boiled with Thule blubber, claiming the broth-bridged bloodlines, a soupy seance that make your fusion cuisine blush. Blizzards battered the bays like old feuds renewed. Snow sealing fjords in white sarcophagi. Villages burrowing deeper into their turf wombs. Quillick flames the sole sun in the endless ebon. Emergence brought the merge's magic. Hybrid tools unearthed in the thaw. A Dorset lamp hafted with Thule ivory. Its wick trimmed to sing the songs anew. And in the berries' hush, mirth muffled the moan. A wind-whipped tale, half Dorset, half Thule, twisting mid-chant to rhyme fjord with board-prompting snickers that shook the dome like seismic jest. Third joke, breathed soft against the oil's glow. What do you call a myth in a fjord? A deep-end legend, but don't dive too quick. Even Nunes got a soft spot for the surface, like after one too many narwhal naps. These final frontiers, navigated narrow and deep, etched the eastward endgame clans rooted in the fjord's fold. Horizons no longer hint but home. Myth and memory merged in the marrow of the merge. Umiaks nested high. Harpoons hung in racks like retired stars, while Polaris gleamed low over the land's last gasp. Dippers pour a final benediction on bays that birthed the bold. Winds off the ice carried the chants eastward no more, settling them soft in the stone's embrace. The saga's stitch complete for now in Greenland's frozen frontier, where new horizons hummed with the old stars' hush. Those old stars' hush lingered in the fjord's fold, long after the Umiaks had weathered to bone-white relics on the high strands, their hulls cradling moss and memories like a grandmother's lap. Centuries stacked like cordwood against the chill, the Thule's bold weave from Siberian twilight etchings to Greenland's glacial grips fading not to footnote but to foundation, the navigator's star paths etched eternal in the ice's unyielding ledger. Nunes descendants, those fjord-born folk with eyes sharp as toggling barbs, still scan the vault where Polaris pins the pole like a steadfast thumbtack, the Big Dipper dipping its paw over bays that now bear their bloodline's breath. Villages evolved from sod scoops to sturdy scatters of frame and tarp holds. Pulse with the passage's pulse. Quillick lamps flickering in windows that frame the aurora's sigh. Songs chanted soft in schoolrooms where Inuktitut curls around English like smoke around stone. The legacy endures, not as dusty diorama but living latitude. These starlit sojourners grit greening the genes of Inuit kin from gnomes' noisy docks to Nuke's neon hum, a lineage that laughs at the freeze. Harpoons traded for rifles, but the hunter's hunch unchanged. The enduring echo ripples in the everyday, those quiet cadences where ancient astronomy meets modern app. Picture a young Inuk in Iqaluit, bundled against the wind's familiar whine, that same gale that gnawed at Kilas Scar, firing up a drone to scout caribou drifts. Its whir a faint cousin to the kayak's creak, while glancing skyward for Polaris nod, the old nail still nailing the north, truer than any satellite ping. Families gather now around LED lanterns that mimic the blubber's bloom, passing iPads etched with star apps that overlay the Dipper's arc on live cams. But the chants underpin it all, verses from the epic looms slipping into bedtime apps, lulling kids with tales of Bering's bite softened for screens. Sensory whisper. the faint, electric hum of charging batteries mingling with the woolly rustle of parkas in the porch light. The crisp snap of snow under snow machine treads, echoing the muckluck's crunch, the distant drone of prop planes ferrying folk from fjord to forum. Modern aside, yeah, they've swapped sinew for synthetics. But try telling a GPS to guide you through a whiteout without a backup from the sky. These navigators' hacks still outsmart Siri on a stormy scroll. Hunts carry the thread tighter. Subzero sagas updated but unbowed. Rifles crack where harpoons once hummed. Belting bowheads in regulated runs that honor quotas carved from the old communal cache. The haul dragged not by dogs but skiffs with outboards that growl like impatient wolves. Yet the lore layers on. Elders teaching youth to read the ices, whisper pressure ridges, ridged like the land's old grudges. Leads opening like invitations from the deep while Polaris wheels overhead, the dippers pour a perpetual pour of plenty. Communities from Alaska's Aleut edge to Greenland's ice-veiled inlets thrive in this tether. Co-ops carving ivory into jewelry that sells in Copenhagen cafes. Tourism trails tracing the tundra treks with guides who quip about Grandpa's GPS being the glow above. The legacies not locked in museums, though those Ottawa halls brim with toggling harpoons that gleam under glass but breathed in the boardrooms where Inuit leaders lobby for land rights. Their arguments laced with the songs, sovereignty, stars cited as sacred sites in treaties that span the strait. Mainstream history crowns this continuity in the Chronicle. Genetic studies since the 2000s trace unbroken mtDNA from Siberian shores to modern Inuit genomes. A maternal map spanning 5,000 years that proves the star paths weren't severed but strung, with Thule innovations, kayak curves and lamp ovals, evolving into today's umiak regattas and seal oil soaps. A cultural continuum that withstood colonial crashes and climate's creep. These echoes aren't echo chamber. Their engine, powering revivals from language nests in Rankin Inlet to art collectives in Pangnirtung, where prints pulse with the passage's poetry. But the quirky fringe, some contemporary storytellers, huddled in heated homes with views of the vault, weave in star sleepers, dormant ancestors who, purr oral wisps, whisper from the ice during solstice slumbers, gifting dream maps of uncharted currents to elders who wake with dipper diagrams doodled on fogged windows. Fringe, or familial frequency, in a world of Wi-Fi waves, a little ancestral bandwidth probably feels like tuning into the cosmos lost channel. As the wheel turns, Polaris steady, dipper dipping through decades of diesel and digital, the legacy lights paths unthought. Inuit astronomers now partnering with NASA, their sky lore lending lenses to telescopes that track auroral dances, turning the old navigator's nods into data streams that dazzle the globe. Youth, those leggy links from Nunes Line, code apps that blend birch bark star charts with blockchain for communal copyrights, safeguarding songs from the strait's salt to the fjord's fold. Sensory soft land. The cool glow of screens on cheeks flushed from frost-kissed cheeks. The faint, synthetic pine of plug-in heaters underscoring the hearth's ghost. The collective click of keyboards echoing the Ulus slice. Yet debates drift in the drifts. Scholars sifting the snow. Historians still argue whether this enduring arc bends more to resilience. Inuit agency authoring their own annals or adaptations. Alchemy, where colonial inks inadvertently inked the old epics deeper into the DNA of defiance. Is it holdout or hybrid? The ice, melting murmurs notwithstanding, mirrors the mystery back. Laughter, that eternal unfreezer, laces the legacy light bubbling in community halls where elders roast the young for trusting metal birds over the nail, or in viral vids of drone hunts gone wonky, a skiff snagged on a berg like Atkus, old pebble folly. One fireside yarn, passed like pemmican at a potluck. A modern hunter, GPS glitching in a gale, squinting at the sky only to quip, well, if Polaris worked for Keeler, it better not ghost me now. The room rolls soft, warm as willow tea. Second jest, murmured over a meal of store-bought char with a side of seal jerky. Why do Inuit stars never retire? They've got eternal night shifts unlike my uncle's stories, which fade faster than summer thaw. These chuckles, gentle as the dipper's dip, keep the weave whimsical, ensuring the echo doesn't echo hollow but hums home. The star paths light on, from eternal ice to electric age. Navigators' nights now networked but never negated. Inuit descendants dancing under the same dome. Harpoons hung as heirlooms beside hockey sticks. Songs streaming on Spotify with footnotes to the frost. Polaris gleams, unblinking, over outposts upgraded to towns that twinkle back. The dipper pouring plenty into pipelines of pride. Scholarships, seeded by saga sails. Festivals firing up fjords with fireworks that mimic the aurora's old show. Quirky kinships crop up, like collaborations, with Cree coders crafting VR voyages through virtual straits, where users paddle phantom umiaks under pixelated poles, a digital diorama that drops you breathless on a beach that smells of brine in binary. And in the quiet cores, where the wind still winds off the white, families trace the thread, a grandmother's finger on a grandkid's palm, etching the nail spot, whispering, "See, still holds us here." These echoes in the eternal ice aren't elegy but anthem. The silent journey's song sung soft into the now starlit sojourners, seeding a people who navigate not just the north but the noise. Their grit a glow that outshines the freeze. Horizons hum on, bays birthing bold anew. The sagas stitch not sealed but stretching, under skies that remember every step, every throw, every chant carried on the cold's clear breath. As the fjord's faint hush settles deeper, like a parka drawn soft over weary shoulders, let the star paths fade gentle into the black dome above Polaris. A quiet anchor, the dipper's pour slowing to a silver trickle that pools in your dreams. Those navigators, with their harpoons and heart, didn't just cross the ice. They carved a cradle in the cold, a legacy that warms the world even as the winds whisper old secrets to the snow. Feel the weight lift, slow as melting bergs, the tundra's tug easing to a sigh, every crunch of boot and creak of kayak softening to the rhythm of your breath in, out, like waves lapping a distant shore. No more the strait's sharp bite or the blizzard's blind rush. Just this, the hush of horizons held, the stars' steady wheel turning tender now, cradling you in the curve of their light. Generations gaze up still, chuckling at the cold's old jokes. Their songs a lullaby looping endless, binding you to the bold who came before. Drift easy, dear listener, into the eternal ices embraced not as end, but as endless rest, where the aurora's veil falls soft as sleep, and the north's quiet nod bids you good night. Sweet dreams, under skies that never forget.